Once upon a time, a girl named Felicity and a boy named Peter bought an abandoned 1830s farmhouse in New York. And normally, we're out on site taking a look at the latest progress on our homestead renovation. But today, I thought we'd do a little bit something different. You all have been asking really great questions in the comments over the last couple of weeks or so. And so I asked if you guys wanted to do a Q&A, and you said yes, and here we are. So I really want to thank everyone who posted their questions a couple weeks ago when I asked what you guys wanted to know about. It turns out that most of what you want to know about falls under the theme of future plans for the house. So that is mostly what we will focus on today. First question I wanted to answer is a question from Leslie. And she wanted to know how we met, why we moved to this area. And then I also had a question about where the name Honey Apple Farm came from. And those are all part of the same story. So Peter and I met at a wedding, a friend's wedding in Virginia in March of 2019. And it was a pretty interesting meeting. At the time, I was living in Portland, Oregon. Peter was living in Baltimore, Maryland. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was doing a lot of house sitting at the time and in Europe. And I had always thought, if I met someone, it would be at one of the castles or the historical sites or the museums that I was going to. I never thought, living such an unconventional digital nomad life, that I would meet my life partner at a wedding, which is incredibly traditional. But we met at a wedding. I asked him to dance. He said yes. He knew how to do the basic waltz. I was an amateur competitive ballroom dancer in my mid-20s and loved to dance, and most men say no if you ask them to dance, any kind of dance. So he said yes. And we connected on Facebook. And honestly, I didn't really think too much of it other than I'd had a good time. But he kept messaging me over Facebook. And we had these long Facebook conversations. And then we started having these long phone conversations. At the time, he was working at an in-person job in Baltimore. And his commute was like an hour and a half home every day in rush hour. So he'd call me in the car and we'd talk on his way home. And that summer, I had a house sit in Weston-super-Mare in southwest England. And so I was in England for the summer, and I had this month-long break between house sits, and I had originally intended to go to Ireland for the summer, or for that month, in August. And I instead ended up booking an Airbnb in Baltimore. Peter and I started dating, so our official anniversary is August 4th. And I had a house sit scheduled outside of Rochester, New York in the fall. It was like a friend of a friend's son who was going away on a semester-long sabbatical. He runs a research laboratory at one of the universities, and they needed a sitter for the two cats. I'd never been anywhere really in New York. I'd only ever been through the New York City airport, which does not count, I'm told. And so I went up to my house sit, and Peter quit his terrible in-person job and came up and spent the last couple of weeks, month maybe, more than that, like the last 6 weeks of the house sit in Rochester. And we both fell in love with the area. It was rural enough to not feel like the city, but not so rural that we were outside of civilization. We were probably about a half hour, 45 minutes outside of downtown Rochester in this cute little community. I was right near the canal. And we had started talking about where we might want to live because Baltimore and Portland are two very expensive cities. And we knew that if we ever wanted to buy a piece of property together, neither one of those cities would work. At the time, Peter was pretty burnt out of living on the East Coast. He'd been in Baltimore for about 15 years, so we didn't think anything of it. We ended up going to Tulsa during the pandemic. They had one of those remote worker relocation programs. And then we decided to move again. Tulsa was always supposed to be temporary, and so we decided to move again, and we did a lot of research into where we wanted to move, and I actually go into a lot of this in more detail in a video I did at the start of this channel, so I'll link that here. But basically the upshot is we were looking for somewhere that was rural but not so rural. We wanted to be, Peter has some medical conditions, and we wanted to be close enough to medical facilities that it wasn't a giant pain in the ass to get to them. We wanted some place that had some cooler weather. Tulsa is a little toasty in the summer, although I do miss the sunshine in the wintertime. It is only the middle of November, and I'm already noticing the number of gray days that go on at length. And so we looked at a number of places. We looked at southern Canada, we looked at Ohio, we looked at eastern Oregon, and it turns out that western New York is actually quite affordable. It's because there's a lot of agriculture out here. There aren't a lot of huge cities, and so we've been looking at houses that were for sale pretty much everywhere west of the Hudson Valley. Excuse me. And then this house popped up, and it seemed to fit all of our criteria. We had a friend come and look at it who lived in Ithaca. He still lives in Ithaca. He's about 45 minutes away, and we moved on it because we knew houses like this were going quickly on the market, and we wanted to grab it. So we did. So that's how we ended up moving specifically to this part of western New York. And the name Honey Apple Farm, I remember this very distinctly. So that first August, before we had officially started dating, I had come back to Baltimore and rented the Airbnb for a month. And I remember standing in the bedroom talking to Peter, and at this point, I had not gotten into homesteading or gardening or cooking or any of that. But I had this vision of buying a piece of property in the country and having it be mine, having it be something I could steward and work with and love. Because one of the things I had discovered about my digital nomadship is that I was really drawn to places, to the history of places, the sense of place. And I had this growing urge to buy a place and make it mine and put my own imprint on it and care for it and love it. And so when I was thinking about what I'd want on that property, I thought, well, I love cider and I love mead. And so if I had a property, I would want a property that produced cider and mead. Peter was really into the bee thing. So I said, what about Honey Apple Farm? Just kind of a name that came out to me. And for the first probably 6 months we were together, that was sort of the code name for this future property we were going to have. And then it just sort of fell by the wayside because we got involved in the pandemic and COVID and moving to Tulsa and learning to live together and all of that stuff. But when it came time to come back to the property buying adventure, when we decided to leave Tulsa, Honey Apple Farm seemed like the right name for the channel. It seemed like the right name for the property. And so that's where the name Honey Apple Farm came from. So let's talk about future plans. A lot of you wanted to know about gardening things that are going on, future plans with the yard, future plans just in general with the house. So let's start with the yard. I talked about this in a couple different videos previously, but our vision for this property, it's 1.7 acres, so it's not huge. It's also not tiny. Our vision for this 1.7 acres is to grow a food forest. And if you've never heard of this concept before, it's the idea that a forest in nature takes care of itself, right? It provides all the food that the animals in it and the other plants in it need to live, and it doesn't require human intervention to be sustainable. And the idea then is, well, can you replicate that environment, that ecosystem on your property, but have elements of it bear food for humans? So for example, if a tree, right, is a major component of a forest, well, you can have all kinds of trees. So why not have a tree that grows apples or service berries or pears or plums or pawpaws, which are little, I think we're still a little too cool up here for pawpaws year-round, fig trees, whatever. So the idea is that if you can build an ecosystem that largely takes care of itself, then the amount of human input you need to harvest and take care of the system is quite low. And that's our interest going forward. I loved the time that I spent gardening in Tulsa. I also am aware of the artificiality of constantly amending your soil and bringing in outside inputs and that kind of thing. I really like the idea of a self-sustaining ecosystem. It isn't going to start out that way. Obviously, we need to do a lot of work to help it get there. But the intention is to build a forest of sorts on that property that provides food and shelter and its own fertilizer and all of those things, so that we don't have to spend hours and hours and hours, weeding and fertilizing and, all of those other things. So that's the plan. And I've never built a food forest before. I've read a couple of great books about them. They come out of the permaculture movement, if you're familiar with that, if you've done any reading about permaculture or gardening, the idea of being really intentional and thinking through multiple uses for different things. So that's where the food forest concept comes from. In the short term, we are certainly going to be probably having some annual beds. I have a lot of flower seeds that I brought with me from Tulsa that are a year or two old, and they don't germinate as well the older they get. So we're definitely just going to chuck some flower seed down next year and see what happens. I do want to grow onions and garlic, which are annual crops. I unfortunately do not have the bandwidth right now to put a garlic bed in this winter, which is the time to do it. You can do them in the spring, but they take like 9 months to grow. So we may be getting garlic from, there's a garlic farm actually just up the road from our house. So we may be getting garlic from them. So the plan is to have some garden beds and then to start the work on the food forest. Honestly, the first thing that we're probably going to do is focus on the annual beds, and we're going to focus on building up the soil, right? Lots of compost, lots of mulch, lots of leaf litter, all those things that you find in a normal forest floor that may or may not be on this property because it's been weedy and grassy for years. So the other thing that we're going to focus on, which some of you did ask about, is what goes between us and the road in the front of the house. So originally our plan was to build a hedge of some sort there. I know that Summer, I believe, had asked about building a hedge and explained that in England, hedges are substantive, and that's true. I'm very familiar with English and Irish hedges, and they are thick. Unfortunately for us, the road in front of our house is a state throughway, which means that the state has the right of way, not just to where the road itself is, but it has the right of way about 20 feet or 25 feet from the center of the road onto our property, which means that if you think about the space between our road and our front porch, about 10 feet from the front porch is totally our property, and then the rest of that space between there and the road, the state has a right of way, excuse me. And so in the right of way, you're not meant to build anything that would be difficult to take out in case the county needs to expand the road or whatever. So hedges are a little tricky at the moment. We're trying to figure out if those are acceptable or not acceptable. The old well is in the right of way, so obviously that would take some work to get out. They'd have to pull out the mailbox post, right? But those are things you could easily do. So our ideal vision was to put some sort of hedgerow, some sort of hedge up there. We were thinking lilacs, we were thinking willow, we were thinking a number of things. We don't want it to be fruit bearing because we don't want to entice animals to cross the road and get hit and hang out in the front yard. That is not our intention. And also with the exhaust coming off the road, we didn't envision anything edible coming out of the front yard. Probably for the first year, we are going to put some of those tall, fancy grasses. You guys have probably seen these in some botanical gardens. They're the ones that grow to about 10 or 12 feet tall and have these beautiful white fan heads on them. They grow quickly. They don't spread except by seed, so you can cut them down. And that was actually a recommendation of a permaculture consultant that we hired over the summer. And that was his suggestion, both for that front line and then also the line of the property that separates us from the restaurant next door. The tree line has been hacked back quite a bit so that we could make room for the driveway and the porta potties and the dumpster. And so that tree line is now pretty bare and you can see through to the other lot. And it's not a problem necessarily, but we would like some privacy. So because those grasses are fast growing and easy to grow, we may start with those and then expand out. But the idea would be to put something in the front of the house that the county will find acceptable and that will reduce the road noise coming off the road as much as possible. We also, of course, need to think about water. Somebody in the comments had asked about our plans to make sure that the ground floor does not flood again. We have put a French drain in just to the side of the road. We do want to build a berm along that on the house-facing side just to provide a little bit more protection and encourage any standing water to kind of hang out and go down the French drain. The French drain is also meant to channel the water around either side of the house. So if it does need to flow downhill, it will flow downhill not into our house, but around our house. The flood in 2018 was one of those like once every 100 years floods, and it happened because there's a culvert that's on the north edge of our property. It's where the creek goes underneath the road and then comes out on our side of the property. And the inlet to that culvert on the opposite side of the road got blocked. And so when there was this massive, crazy, totally unexpected amount of rainfall, the culvert was blocked and it backed up over the road and came into the house. So we're hoping that with us in residence, that we can keep the culvert clear because the house has been abandoned for a number of years. So it wasn't like anybody was living there and noticed the culvert was getting cloggy. They just weren't there. So we're hoping that living there will prevent that problem. We're obviously going to keep an eye on the culvert. We have also put in the French drain. And if we can put a berm up there as well, that will hopefully help. So that is the plan for the garden and the yard. We do want to do composting as well, but there's no way that the amount of fruit and veg and compost that we make is going to cover 1.7 acres in any kind of timely fashion. So what I would expect to see in the next 1 or 2 growing seasons is a number of raised beds, annual raised beds, and then you're going to see us working on the forest. We need to, as I said, build up the soil. We also need to plan what we want to go where. Our list of fruit trees that we want to grow far exceeds the amount of space that we have on our property. And so part of what we want to do over the next year or 2 is figure out who's growing what nearby. For example, this is apple country. So do we really need to grow our own apples? We'll probably grow an apple tree or 2, but there's U-pick apples around here, right? So it doesn't make sense to use our precious 1.7 acres on apples when we can get a lot of them from our neighbors. Same with blueberries. Blueberries grow really, really well here. There's a lot of blueberry places, U-pick blueberry places. Doesn't make sense to use our 1.7 acres to grow blueberries? Maybe not, right? And so part of what we need to do is figure out what's available, what are our neighbors growing that we could trade for or buy, and then figure out what maybe isn't as available. We know service berries, which are also called Saskatoons or June berries. Those are hard to find. There is a U-pick place around here, but those are hard to find and we love them. So like those, plums, there's a lot of peach orchards around here, so I think that might be something that we don't have to grow. Quince trees, something that you don't grow very often. And then we would like to, this gets into a little bit of experimental stuff, we'd like to grow things like pawpaws, avocados, figs, a little bit more warm weather stuff. So we'll see how that goes. So anyway, that's the plan for the garden. Other future plans, as you can imagine, growing or buying all of that stuff, we would like to preserve as much as possible. Now, Peter has a dehydrator, which we used quite a lot in Tulsa. It turns out that dehydrated cherry tomatoes are chef's kiss in omelets, y'all. They're amazing. Peter prefers them to anything else, and we have run through our supply since we moved. But we really want to get into freeze drying. Now, most people get into canning, right? And given our canning jar haul, it would be natural to think, oh, they're going to get into canning. The thought of canning super does not appeal to me. I've taken classes. We've taken an in-person class. I've read books about it. I've watched online, YouTube videos about it. I just don't want to can. It does not look appealing or fun to me in any way. So freeze drying, on the other hand, sounds great. You chop stuff up, you freeze it, you put it in the machine, it comes out with all the air, the moisture sucked out of it, and you can rehydrate it whenever you need or not, as you choose. So we really want to get a freeze dryer. They are not inexpensive. I believe the least expensive Harvest Right model is currently around $2,500. But that holds a great amount of appeal, and we also want to get a freezer. Right, so we can just, berries or something, anything that we don't have time to preserve in the moment, we can freeze meat, although you can also freeze dry that. So that's our intention. Our intention is to start buying a lot of bulk, food in bulk, because it's cheaper that way, and we'll actually have room in this house to store it. The place we had in Tulsa was only 1,000 square feet, so we started doing this a little bit with rice, but we'd really like to buy more stuff in bulk and be able to store it. We're going to get a freezer at some point. We have a small one now. It's 5 cubic feet, which is enough for a small apartment, but not really the scale that we want. And then getting the freeze dryer, and we would love to, be able to go to the U-pick apple place, right, and just buy, however many pounds of apples we need for the year and preserve them and things like that. So that's the plan on that side. Peter, by the way, is the cook. Somebody had asked about that. Peter is the chef in the family. He makes delicious dinners. He makes delicious breakfasts. My interest is baking. So I have been experimenting over the last few years with breads and sourdough and things like that. In fact, this book by Melissa K. Norris called Handmade, I've made quite a few of her recipes. She has a master dough recipe in here, which is a dough that you can make and put in the fridge and then turn into a number of different things. So I've been experimenting with that over the last year. I also have been experimenting with sourdough. So many of you will be familiar with Lisa Bass, Farmhouse on Boone. This is her first book. And the company I work for actually published this book. So if you look closely on the inside copyright page, you will see my name, which is pretty cool. But I've been using some of her sourdough recipes. Oh, you guys, if you ever want to try sourdough, her sourdough cinnamon rolls, woo, so good. So Peter's the cook. I'm the baker, I guess we'll call it. So together we are making most of our meals. Peter cooks most of our meals from home. We don't eat out a lot anymore. And honestly, most of the times we eat out, unless it's really high quality restaurants or ethnic restaurants, the stuff at home just tastes better. So other plans for what we want to do, and I touched on this when I mentioned volunteering at the library. One of the things that's really important to Peter and I is that we build a community out here. Because we were only planning to be in Tulsa for a few years and moved during the pandemic, we didn't invest a lot of time in building a personal community in Tulsa, which was good when we moved, but also was a little bit difficult in the moment. I have a lot of very close friends, Marcia and Karen, who are two of the most wonderful supporters of this channel and me. But I've never met them in person. They are previous coworkers who are now very dear friends. And, my parents live in Iowa, so I talked to my mom and my dad who watches this channel, but they're not here in person. And of course, I have all my friends in Portland who also are not here in person, including my second mother, Evelyn, who I talked to on the phone, but is not here in person. And so one of the things that we talked at length about before we moved to New York was how important establishing a local community was going to be. So that's one of the reasons we want to volunteer at the library. It's one of the reasons that I have been making an effort to get to know our neighbors and talk to our neighbors, not only because they have helpful information that as being new to the area we need, but I want to be on friendly terms with our neighbors. We had five great neighbors in our little neighborhood in Tulsa, the neighbors on either side and the three neighbors across the street. And it was really satisfying just to sort of, chat with them when I would come back from my walk in the morning or hang out on their back porch every once in a while. And I really liked that sense of community. And it's something that I'm not great at building in person. And so that's something that we really want to focus on, getting involved in the community. One of the other, and this is sort of 3 to 5 to 10 years down the road, one of the other things that we really want to do with this house is build some kind of in-person business. So I'm currently a project manager for Homestead Living, which is the company that published the book that I showed you earlier. And I love the homesteading movement. I love people, learning skills for themselves. But the work is online, and that's amazing because it means I can work from anywhere and all of my colleagues can work from anywhere. But at the end of the day, it's me looking at a computer screen, right? For 95% of my day, and the other 5% are Zoom meetings. And increasingly, as I get older, I want to be able to see something tangible for the hours that I put in. We've talked about a number of variations of what this business could be, and it will probably change again before we get around to trying something. But we've talked about having a freeze-dried food business. We've talked about renting a freeze dryer, right? Setting it up so if you don't have your own freeze dryer, you could just come and to like a little freeze drying chalet on our property, and you could pay a monthly fee and you'd be able to use the freeze dryers. We have talked about a number of other ideas, some variations on a roadside stand, all kinds of things. And what makes this possible, Peter is able to do the extrovert networking thing that I am learning to do, but I'm not as good at. My strength is the back end stuff. And so we're sort of taking a look at what's around here, what's successful, what are people doing, where are there gaps in the market that might interest us. So I would really love to launch a business from home. I don't want to grow food. I'm not interested in having a CSA or growing food for other people or even flowers. I considered that at one point, having a flower farm. It turns out I really hate cutting flowers. I love seeing the flowers just grow in the wild. So we're still working on what that might be, but I would love to have a business going forward. And it's actually one of the reasons we bought this property, despite the noise factor. It's right on the main road, and there are a lot of roadside stands. So if we do want to do something with freeze-dried food or a roadside stand, something that would fit into the existing wine tourist market, we're right on the wine route. And then the last future plan thing, and I'll wrap up with this, Right now, this channel is focused mostly on the home renovations because that is the vast majority of what is happening with this house. But once the home renovations slow down, once we're in the house and they slow down to a little bit more manageable pace, I want to pick up some of the hobbies that or skills I had started working on when I was in Tulsa. So I'd started doing a little bit of wood carving. I'd started doing a little bit of sewing. I had been making my own soaps and lotions and things like that. Nothing, again, for sale, just for my own use. So I'm really interested in learning how to do things. I'm a very kinesthetic person, and I'm not interested in having animals on the property. Somebody had asked about that, and I forgot about that. I think Stephen asked about chickens. I'm not interested in having animals on the property, but I am interested in learning how to make cheese. I am interested in learning how to sew, how to bake, how to do some woodworking. I would love to be able to build furniture. In fact, there's a group here out of Ithaca called Hammerstone, and they do basic, tools and women's woodworking and stuff like that. I would love, love, love to take a class from them at some point. They are just out of our budget right now, which is fine. So as this channel evolves, as we get into the house and as the home renovations slow down to, DIY projects that we are working on as we can, I am hopeful that some of you will stick around for some more of those explorations into other related skills, because that's of interest. And I'm also hoping to get better at YouTube. I've really enjoyed sharing this journey with you, and meeting all of you through the comments has been way more fun than I anticipated. And so I suppose we'll put YouTube and visual storytelling also down on the list of skills. So let me just check my notes and make sure I didn't miss anybody else's important question. Oh, okay, so 2 other questions that are animal related. Summer had asked if we're going to get a dog. We are not. I am not a dog person. That property has no fencing on it, and I am not interested in our dog running out on the road and getting hit by a semi-truck. So at this point, we have no plans to get a dog whatsoever. We have no plans to get chickens, although Peter would really like some, and so going forward, we may experiment with that. We also have a lot of farm stands around here that sell farm fresh eggs, so that may be something that we just make friends with a neighbor. And then a couple of you had asked about Mr. Darcy, our cat. He was in one of our previous videos in the background. He pretty much clears out when I start talking to the camera or on Zoom. He's perfectly happy to hang out when we're watching TV or when Peter and I are talking to each other. But when I'm talking to the computer screen, he just is not interested in being around. He is 4 years old. He was a rescue. He came begging at our door in Tulsa on a cold January night in 2022, about 3 months after our previous rescue cat passed away. You probably won't see him very often in the background because he takes off, but he is here and he is around, and he's black with a little white on his tum-tum, and we love him dearly. We would like to get a second cat. He's of an age where I think he would like some companionship and someone to play with, but since he walked in off the street, we have no idea what he's like with any other animal, so we're a little hesitant to try that until we're really secure, both in our house and he's had a chance to settle in, and also, that we have the finances to be able to afford a second cat. So, thank you again to everyone who submitted your questions. This has been really fun. Hopefully you didn't mind the talking head video for for this amount of time. If you have more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I will do my best to answer them. And if you liked the format of this video, let me know and we can do it again sometime. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you soon in my next video. Bye for now.